Hello and welcome to the PSC in Conversation. I'm Antonio and I'm delighted to be hosting one of our next 20 series episodes where we reflect back on the last 20 years of public services and look ahead to the next 20 months and indeed the next 20 years. I'm delighted to be joined by my wonderful colleague Jonathan Chappell, senior partner at the PSC, and we've spent many happy years working together on our mission. And we're going to cover today the big topic of innovation, what that means for public services and how they can truly be brilliant, and how that sets the tone for the potential for the next 20 years. But before we start, Jonathan, introduce yourself, please. Tell us about the PSC story.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jonathan Chappell. I am a senior partner at the PSC. So I'm interested in innovation, and I suppose I'm here because I have the privilege of working with hospitals, universities, industry, innovators in that sort of space. So I guess, spoiler alert, that's probably the bit that I'm going to be talking most about. I guess I've been able to do this work from starting my career, having been a physics graduate. So I spent quite a lot of time playing with neural nets, probably too long, too late into the night. We may talk about that later, how the technology has changed, through to then working for the NHS, Department of Health, before it was Department of Health and Social Care, doing some basically data-driven stuff. And I think, again, another little teaser for things we'll come to, because data being the underpinning of most of this stuff. So these days I spend time with clients thinking about basically where you can get people and money together to do really different and interesting things, and what are the ingredients that make that work. So excited to be talking with you.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining to share more about the work that you and your clients and teams do. So, but maybe even before we come on to that, so you mentioned being a physics graduate, and but did you have an inkling about innovation? What does innovation even mean to you before we move on to what is innovation more broadly, and what got you interested in this world?
So thank you. I think about innovation a lot, and I work on it a lot, and so we clearly have lots of very structured ways of looking at that. And when I was preparing for this podcast, I looked at even more structures to think about it, which I suppose hopefully all you listeners, you'll have an interest in this too, and will have seen some of them. But really personally, I think about this as being the magic bit that happens between something that someone spotted that's a bit different, whether that's something that's existed for ages that can be translated somewhere new, or whether that's like, oh my crikey, there's something fundamentally different going on here. And the reason I say magic is not because you can't influence it or work on it, but it's because actually doing things that really are a bit different, and particularly when you're doing that at scale, doesn't always work. So one of the things as a management consultant I find quite difficult in talking about innovation is sometimes we're going to have to fail to make this work. And there are lots of ways in which that's a really good thing, but also it's part of it. So that's the way, personally, I've experienced it as being that bit that you can quantify lots of these things. You can hone in on things that are going to make things more likely or less to work. But actually often it's that sort of secret bit you get when you get the right group of people together with the right problem. Something interesting comes out of it.
And that magic, it's well, maybe we'll come on to it, but presumably, there's an element of the unexpected. You don't quite know when it's going to come about and how it's going to come about, but part of the job is to put the right structures around it.
Yeah, completely. And I think what those structures are has changed even in the past decade. So when we're looking back 20 years of the PSC, but I think structures are human and people things. So, I actually specialize in innovation, but I do a lot of governance work with clients, because actually if you can have the right authority to act and kind of get out the way, then that really helps. So there's a bit of that. The other structure things are around having the right sort of combination of different, we call them platforms. I suppose we call them platforms in any industry, but in health and care, we think about those as, labs, yes, also from a data perspective, data platform, infrastructure, but also some of the collaboration elements. And a lot of that is to do with technology and sort of scientific equipment, but it's also then to do with how you get the people who can bump into each other. So, those studies that were now probably about 20 years ago about how clusters work, and if you really genuinely get researchers from different disciplines to just have coffee together, you get different things happening. Still true, right? And I've been talking to clients about that in the past week, about how you still get that co-location effect and the interesting things, the unexpected that comes from that sort of collaboration.
So, Will, you touched upon examples within healthcare there. Maybe let's focus in, but given that that's so much of what we do at the PSC, what is specific, I suppose, about health and care with regards to innovation?
So there are some like pretty widely understood structures that sort of come from, if innovation is about new things being either adopted, scaled, or sort of achieving their sort of full potential. So talk about translational research, talk about, and that has fairly sort of, I guess, well codified and actually regulated structure. So there's sort of things that happen in the lab or in sort of biological discovery. Then you have a sort of clinical trials structure that runs through different phases that I won't rehearse here. And then the latter phase, so sort of phase 4 trials into sort of real world evidence piece, where really the question is like, how is this thing working? Is it doing things we weren't expecting? When we have different populations using things, like what happens and how do we get different insights from that? And then there's the sort of the bit that particularly the NHS talks about as the innovation piece, which is sort of from that into it being available on a day-to-day basis everywhere for the people who it can benefit. And I think sort of for lots of clients, that's the part that I really hear people thinking about, is like, where can we make sure that a new test or a new drug or a new intervention can be properly available for the people who need it, and not over-intervene or under-intervene? Because actually a lot of these things, when you look at them at sort of mass level, there's a sort of a fine line there. So what's different about healthcare is level of regulation, and also like quite how much of an industry there is in all these different things that spans different sectors. So you've got sort of very research being sort of university heavy, increasingly industry, through trials, which again have a sort of split there, and the NHS has a role to play in that. And then when you come to adoption, in this country, it's very NHS focused, but actually increasing the role of suppliers is there, and internationally that looks different again.
And you set out the kind of a typical and the most regulated process from, I suppose, idea to benefiting a patient. But we've obviously lived through some quite aggressive recent shocks like COVID. How do big changes like that affect that process?
So I think that's still playing out. When I talk to clients who are researchers who sort of lived through that and were able to and had to change what they were studying on a sort of moment's basis, and then really scale up certain types of studies quickly. And lots of people have talked about the incredible things that happen in vaccines at a rate that was very unprecedented. And I think then it's interesting how the conversation has changed over time as some of the immediate pressures fallen away and some of the changes then sort of become unwound a little bit to sort of be back to a more steady, sort of a more stable state of how innovation gets funded and supported. I think one of the things that I often hear people talk about is clarity of like purpose, use case. So one of the things that is very helpful is you have one clear problem to all work on together, and over history there's been lots of that as sort of the shocks that drive innovation. And that is something we talk a lot and work a lot with clients on, is how when you're a leader responsible for the whole breadth of healthcare, it is possible to have priorities, and how you can use those to make more progress than might otherwise possible, whilst not closing off the sort of existential and sort of scientific approach of actually, finding things out for their own sake usually results in quite a lot of good stuff. And there's lots of studies about the positive impact on GDP from the spin-outs of those things.
Yes, that's a great point, that actually COVID specifically wasn't about virtual working or shocks to the economy. It was about a precision of, we need to find a cure for this new thing.
I think so, and I think it also sometimes very challengingly drew focus to a very immediate type of lots of people being very unwell in a particular way at one point. So what really was, there's a sort of shock of itself, and then there's been how that then is affecting things as we move forward.
So you've been 15 years with the PSC this year?
I don't like to think about things like that time. Off an age where that's
well, let's say a good decade, a good over a decade,
like 16 years.
Gosh, what has let's talk about at least the past decade. How's the past decade changed in terms of the work that you were doing and we were doing with clients 10 years ago through to 2026?
So if I think back 10 years, the work we were doing was, well, there's sort of two big areas that sort of stick out in my mind at least, and this probably won't be everything, but I'll start with these. So one of them was so even 10 years ago, and certainly sort of 12 to 16 years ago, we were doing lots of actual sort of clinical model design work with clients. So working with multidisciplinary, multi-professional teams and sitting down and saying, for example, supporting older people living with frailty, like what does a model that really supports that patient group look like? There's bits of international examples, bits of people who've done different things in the UK at that point, but really the conversation was more about what are the elements of general practice and specialist care that really work, and what are the elements that don't, and how do we change that? And that has changed a lot in that type of work to what we're doing now, which I guess I'll come on to. So sort of 10 years ago, we were doing quite a lot of that, and great fun working with those teams. And that bit I was saying earlier about what comes out with the sort of the group working together, I think that was one of the sort of special things about that stuff back then, was actually the opportunity to work in different groupings to the sort of traditional healthcare structure. Pretty cool. The other area was we do lots of business case work. I mean, it's a need for consulting, and it's also a sort of space where trying to help leaders think about where to put really quite significant amounts of money for a long periods of time in like the right place to deliver the best impact. And so there was a lot of work back then about designing physical and digital infrastructure that was fit for systems, big systems of care. So thinking about population of 5 to 10 million catchment. So we were doing a lot on like how you understand very rare disease and very common disease, and you understand the interaction, and that gives you a different type of learning system to bring therapies to patients quicker, because it still takes too long for new stuff to be available to everyone, even where it's appropriate. So if that was a decade ago, and we were writing business cases for things like the ability to do CAR T interventions in patients sort of early, not the very first of those, but like in trials, and some of the lab infrastructure that allows you to be able to do those therapies. So you need to sort of make various things that, as I've already shared, I have a physics background rather than clinical or biological. So this will get to the edges of my understanding. But
it's all the same, isn't it?
Yeah. Indeed. So you need to be able to make things like viral vectors, which is part of the sort of underlying apparatus that allows those therapies to work. So we would be like helping write the business case for those sorts of facilities, both for grant funders, but also for clinical research environments for the NHS.
Can I ask on that? So most of our listeners, I think, are clients past and present, but there's a good chunk of people who dream of working at the PSC, and I suspect some of them will be listening, particularly maybe a young previous me as a humanities graduate, thinking, how on earth can you go into bat with leading clinical academic specialists when you don't know when you're Googling what a CAR T cell is? How does that work? You talked about multidisciplinary teams, so that's people from, I guess, different professions and domains. But where do management consultants fit into that?
Well, I didn't bring my stand-up routine with me, but modern science, modern innovation is a real team effort. And you see that across, what Google does for supercomputers. When you walk into any university now, these are big teams. So being part of that team is the thing a management consultant can do. And that's what I always see as the privilege when I go in and when I'm working with teams. So we have training in things like doing business cases to all the HMT required standards, and we've got experience of
5-case model, all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, love it. And that's necessary for lots of reasons, but also we have that experience of having done that in lots of different places. So we're used to where those processes can trip, or where you can actually make sure you can get ahead of future risk by actually bringing the right conversation to bear early on. So actually I see this as being about partnering with the individuals who have the vision to change these things, and being able to provide a bit of that skill set, but also a bit of having worked in lots of different places, the ability to sort of challenge and throw other sort of ideas into the pot. I think challenge is probably too strong. It's just people like to talk about it, but we have a lot of conversations like, hey, why is it working that way here? Have you thought about if we added a bit more engineering into the mix rather than keeping it sort of pure healthcare side? How does that play out for you? What does that look like? Or why are we focusing so much on the high volume intervention with a bit too little on the diagnostic? Where do those things come together? Sort of fairly obvious examples, but I think management consultants bring that. And I guess actually probably the last thing as I'm thinking on this is it's a people exercise, all of these things. So there's using analysis and understanding the potential that our clients really will work on from the research structures and peer review. But actually some of this is about making sure leaders with different visions can have a right conversation about what they can do together. And management consultants who are happy to facilitate rather than wanting to provide all the insights. So people like us have a role to play in that.
Yeah, Carl, thank you. Well, obviously, I completely agree, but I think that demystifies some of that. The who's in the tent making the innovation happen. Maybe we should talk a bit about kind of fast forward into the now and maybe the near future. What's hot in the world of clinical innovation now, and what's happening?
I was thinking we'd keep this sort of focused on practical things we can do. So there are a couple of areas I wanted to draw out. So one of them is, as I alluded to in my intro, data.
Heard of it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everything runs on data. And one of my slight pet peeves that colleagues and clients who've worked with me will have heard me say is, that there is a danger that we talk about the data like it's sort of the pet hamster in the reception class, like it's a thing, like just a single thing you can kind of put in a cage and just sits there, runs in its wheel. Of course, it's everything. And so innovation right now, using like modern secure technologies to provide reference library rather than lending library access for researchers, it's been going on for a while, but it seems to really have reached a head of steam now. So there's a lot of that happening, and we have the privilege of serving clients doing that sort of stuff. And there, one of the interesting challenges is how you get what is a really incredible but fairly disparate sets of data that can then work together. So you can access the truly sort of multimodal view of the world. So not just administrative data, but also pictures and scans and lab insights. So that is a big part of what's going on. So even when, yesterday I was talking with a group about like building physical buildings for interventions, but actually we ended up spending 25% of the time talking about data and the different types of data sets that would be needed to provide the best care for patients, but also would be created so we could understand what even future generations might look like. So you sort of get into the idea of their like learning health system and really push that into everything, even kind of talking about like what theatres you build, which is what we were doing yesterday. So that's one sort of big thing. I suppose the other one is, and as things move at ever faster pace, how we can have robust evaluation and regulation, and also appropriately responsive strategic commissioning for all you NHS listeners out there, that has really good and rigorous checks, but also doesn't wait longer than it needs to for things to come into practice. And there's lots of areas where there's been lots of success in that. So, particular shout out to everything that's happened in genomics in the NHS recently, and lots of potential there. Those structures have really been working and moving things forward quickly. But I just think that's going to be increasingly a challenge, particularly as stuff is expensive. So you need to find out quickly whether it works.
On the money point, what's the best way to get funders, from all different varieties, to focus on what to the untrained ear sound like, the boring bits of the exciting, but presumably the GLP-1s didn't come about because, well, the story isn't, we invested really heavily in data, but I imagine that is exactly what happened.
Helped.
How do you help people realize it's those building blocks which will lead to the real success?
So most of our practice is sitting with the public services side of this discussion. So I can't comment so much on how large companies think about this, but I can talk about partnering with them. So when thinking about funding, I suppose one of the advantages of quite a heavily structured and regulated development pipeline is you get pretty good sight of where there is a sort of critical mass emerging, or where there are sort of potentially interesting technologies emerging where there aren't comparators. So usually that stuff happens completely organically all day, every day in these big organizations. Like, people talk to each other and they're reading the journals. And so actually a lot of the time I find the secret with clients is like getting a structure so you can make those voices heard and also allow the conversation to happen. So it's not just the loudest voices. So there's a bit of that. I think grant funders have done lots over the past decade about being really open and engaged with both researchers and industry on what's coming up, and also actually, I think increasingly helpfully sort of being clear on what they want and need, and asserting where they would want to see structural change in, for example, bigger scale collaboration rather than individual organizations coming back. So from a money perspective, data allows you to collaborate in a really open way with proper safeguards. So just to be really clear, so we can be really secure with patient data, but once we're clear on the basis and the authority and the consent to use, then be actually pretty collaborative with researchers on approved projects. So there's a bit here about listen to the funding councils, keep your eye out on that future, but also, I talked before about governance, having the structures where you can let different generations of researchers sort of say, well, actually, we think this is the direction we're going in, can make a big difference.
And how do you, like you mentioned the journals and the funding councils, how do you stay up to speed with everything that's going on? Is that through a combination of your client work, the teams? Do you wake up every morning and read what's the latest research area? Do you listen to any other good podcasts?
I mean, no other good podcasts. I mean, crikey. So the real privilege of our job is the time we get to spend with clients, and that is the single best way. And I suppose back to what value we can add is being connected into a few different systems. I pick up on different things from each. So that is the main way. And then actually that usually sets my reading agenda. Although if I'm honest, one of the other things about innovation and just thinking about like the role of a management consultant is, I find that just literally spending a little bit of time with the paper at the weekend is quite a helpful way of filtering and filing sort of mentally the different, really quite nitty and detailed insights that are coming up through project work into something that then starts to make a little bit more sense. So when I'm having a conversation with a board, which, you know, I have made these mistakes over my career where I sort of turn up and get really into the specifics of the business case, and they'll start going like, that's great, but like, honestly, that's one of however many interventions. So actually, I think one of the secrets in innovation, and one of the things I think for management consultants, is to be aware of the detail, but to sort of live a little bit more in the structure and some of the bigger trends that are going on, to try and help make sense of that.
Nice. Well, thinking about those bigger trends, what are a few major themes or insights that you're seeing coming through the current pipeline of innovation?
So systems are getting better at saying we want innovation, and it's not good enough that we're waiting too long for it. So the 10-year plan has done lots of great things, but that's one of the things it's really clearly set out. So
and the system could be almost any unit of size. You know, it doesn't have to be a nation state level.
No, it doesn't. I don't think so. But it probably does need to be sort of enough that it's serving a few million people.
And I intuitively, I definitely know the answer to this, but could you say a bit more about the size? Because obviously there's lots of countries in the world which are smaller than 5 million, definitely smaller than 10 million. So, what's the importance of the size for that unit of currency?
So I'm sort of challenging myself in responding to this question. So it's all, the traditional answer to that has been two things. So one of them is, thankfully, a lot of diseases are pretty rare. And actually, so you need a big enough population to be able to understand those. And quite a lot of the new discoveries come out of that side. So that's part of it. Also because I think, realistically, that's the scale at which you have the range of services that you need in order to make a sort of something like a teaching hospital work, which then also means you get all the different types of people to turn up, which is sort of back to the people thread. There's then the other side, which is about diversity of population. And I think, clearly we need to sort of understand that that's different in different places. But one of the problems with biomedical research is the studies haven't traditionally been done on sufficiently diverse populations. And so that's one of the things that I really see clients working in, like, really actively on now, where sort of many years ago that was known about and talked about, but was only part of the discussion. Now it really is a big focus.
Thank you. Sorry. So I digressed, but it was on those big trends coming through, and you talking about how the systems can articulate system needs almost better.
Exactly, which is a strategic commissioning bit. So I think doing bits of work looking at, think about like health data. What are the places that have created like a critical mass and sort of set of insights? And a lot of that often has been around like particular clinical areas. So actually having the trick is having a sort of using fairly general technologies, but then also acknowledging that actually, if you really want to make this motor, it is helpful to say, well, actually this part of the world cares about everything, but specifically from this data research point of view, we're going to focus mainly on cancer, or here we're going to think about cardiovascular and the interaction to metabolic conditions, or here we're thinking about early years development and maybe mental health. It can still be pretty broad, but just having some sense of a true north allows that scale to then also result in translation to impact. We see systems increasingly are required to act on, like, virtual wards were they still are an innovation, and were definitely an innovation when I was first in the consulting game. And now that's something that everyone has to do and is reported on every month. So that is something that's changing. And then at the other end, notwithstanding all the global financial dynamics affecting pharma industry, actually seeing increasingly investment in a particular therapeutic or particular research and therapeutic area alongside a clinical team in a particular like clinic setting, and actually how you get pockets of those that then start to add up to something bigger. So some quite interesting trends there that sort of we're operating in both directions. So like you must do the scale innovation, but actually it potentially has become a bit harder to do some of the early stage innovation unless you're really working with others to get your scale and really welcoming partnership.
Who's doing particularly exciting work particularly in the public services field here?
So we've had the great privilege of serving the One London team for a number of years, off and on different things, and there's a team there, but also one of the things that the leaders of that, so Luke in particular, has always been keen to emphasize is that's collaborative. So it's about all parts of London working together and bringing. When I say parts of London, this is an NHS and academia focused initiative, and so he's done a good job there of creating an environment where the best of each of the different areas of London can come together and they can get better at working together. That's really been working and has come to fruition in the secure data environment, which is on its way to being live as we speak, which is, I think, really exciting and will be a very helpful way for researchers and industry to find it easier to navigate, because there are many secure data environments in London, and that's appropriately so. But actually how you navigate those is, I'm paid to go and talk to all these people, and I keep finding out about more. So if you're a new spin out, actually, One London and the crew there are doing great work to make that a bit easier, working with their partners in their health innovation networks. I think also been doing some work with colleagues at Guy's and St Thomas's, and they host a network of excellence and a program around new technologies in genomics, called metagenomics, so sort of the pathogen rather than the human, and watching the way that that's a sort of big system where individuals have sort of spotted new technologies. Some UK company provides like some of the discovery that turned into something you can do, but then using that to have a difference for patients in ICU. It's really impressive work, and then navigating the how you test and improve that at pace really effectively.
Thank you. And maybe actually you mentioning secure data environments, and I was reflecting that's a relatively novel development of the last 10 years. On a broader theme, as part of the Next 20 series for the podcast, where one of the messages I've been reflecting on is that there's actually a lot to be proud of in innovations and improvements that have happened in public services. And I've separately, with the PSC, but have had the privilege of doing some work in the east of England on some of their data work as well. And it was, I should remember when the Ben Goldacre report was, but the idea of trusted research environment and the O'Shaughnessy report and the drive to make the UK a great place for, safe, fair, consented data to be used is a relatively recent phenomenon and is globally doing relatively, in the global sense, really well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
I suppose two reflections. One is that something that can and should be celebrated even more by, as part of UK PLC, and two, what made that possible? Because I guess didn't have to be this way. There was quite a lot of political attention for some time, but and some funding, but lots of things get political attention and some funding and don't necessarily come to such fruition.
Gosh, yeah. I personally think it's a huge thing to be celebrated. And I think, the impact of those initiatives already, and, they're only really just getting going. So I'm really excited for 5 years' time, let alone 20, to see what's been possible as a result of all of that. And I think that what made that possible? Well, so my experience working with those clients I've served, so particularly in London, is one of the things they did really, really early on, basically before they started with a conversation with the public, and understanding what do you expect as the public us to be able to do with your data, and what isn't okay, and how can we use that as the starting point? And then from that, then conversation with clinicians who fundamentally are only worried about their patient care and their patients. And then actually that gives you then the only real basis to work on, which is what do patients expect? What's going to help the clinicians who are looking after them, and how can we make sure they're confident in what you're doing, but then also how can you make sure it's available to do the type of improvement that clinicians want to see. So we've talked here about some of the sort of more the future of care, so moving towards precision healthcare, precision medicine as part of that. But actually a lot of this is about, if you're running a big general practice and you have a population that's very mixed or in a deprived area, part of this is about basically making sure that the current standard of care is properly available every day, absolutely, including to people who don't always access GP services, and actually using the data for that purpose immediately moves the dial for patients, immediately moves the dial for the people who are frustrated by not being able to provide the care they want to in clinic. And if you build from there, then lots possible.
Indeed. So for leaders working in this space, what else does the future hold?
So the future holds a real opportunity to be bold around the precision elements, precision healthcare in its broader sense, but also the need to balance things changing relatively quickly and also not as quickly as you would like. So one of the things we've been doing, if you think about like what do you build and how do you build it, is to talk about we call them like archetypes of buildings. So like what are the types of like combinations of healthcare and adjacent to healthcare infrastructure that makes sense together, that are going to give you some flexibility and longevity, but also allow you to build towards the model you want to provide rather than the one we're stuck providing today because of the environment we work in. So I think one of the main things that the next 20 years holds is that like combination of needing to be bold, but needing to be practical in the steps towards it. And that's, to be honest, the bulk of what day to day at the moment it sort of looks like, is how we can make that work using some sort of sensible bets based on some analysis of things that are happening, but also some work with some of those leaders and innovators who are saying, no, this can look different and I'm going to make it look different.
Thank you. I'm going to add in just some random quickfire questions, if that's all right. But this is brilliant. So obviously in the world of AI, in which we do lots, there's a very fanciful, this is maybe not going to go where you're anticipating. There's this the West Coast tech bros idea, the longevity focus and living forever seems to have captured a new imagination. Brian Johnson, who many of you will have checked out, maybe I don't know if some of those things are safe for work for Googling, but anyway, who wants to live forever, and others.
Oh, that guy,
Is that, where does that fit in the realms of possibility for the future? And would it even be desirable? Not living forever, but they're talking about 150 years as longevity. Well, one of the things we've seen, obviously, in healthcare, particularly in the UK, but a lot of Western countries, is actually life expectancy gains going back in the last 10 years. So, longevity, well yes or no?
The small issue is on a rainy afternoon in Southampton. Well, actually, when I started my career, I did some workforce planning. Shout out to the workforce planners. Not an easy job, in my experience anyway. And we had someone come speak to us about aging and the sort of biological process of aging and what might be possible in reversing it. Because from a workforce planning point of view, it's quite a big question, both in terms of volume of healthcare, but also in terms of how many staff do you need to look after people. So that was 20 years ago, we were sort of having that discussion. So I think this is clearly not a new question, even sort of in scientific terms. I suppose one of the things that I know is a practical challenge for a lot of leaders I'm serving is the gap between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy, which is probably getting, well, I actually haven't looked at the stats on this personally in the past year, so I won't quote them, but it's not getting better everywhere, I think is, I feel confident to say, sadly. So I think there's a real question about what's the role of health services in addressing that gap? How much of that is healthcare? How much of that is about lifestyle? How much of that is about opportunity and inequality in society? Answer quite a lot. So I'm not sure where I'm going on this. But personally, I don't know, if I think about the books I read, I don't know, by which I mean just like standard literature, there's perhaps a lot to be thought about in the consequences of living very long period of time, even if it's quite exciting to be healthier for longer, to lead more fulsome lives.
Thank you. Okay. Again, on AI, everyone is saying, oh, don't worry about these huge energy hungry models, because not only can they make your emails better, they're also going to somehow do new drug discovery, which is something which, in particular, Anthropic have been talking about a lot recently, but obviously Google DeepMind has been a big focus. So I'm just mindful of juxtaposing that ambition with your point about data and data availability. Like, how plausible is that world?
So, I mean, a lot of that's already happening. And so the research processes that in this podcast, I'm sure a lot of researchers will, thank you if you are listening and have got this far, will be like, this guy is just glossing over what is like years and years of sweat and tears and walks around the block and everything else to go through quite high volumes of things. And that's where AI is helpful, is you can just smash through a series of combinations and a quantity of possibility where it can spot trends in a different way. It's effectively what it does, patterns. So, and speed up parts of this process. That is already happening and will continue to do so. Where that extrapolates to, I'm not sure. I do think there are likely to be large parts of disease that are going to be manageable and could be curable within, well, certainly I hope my kids' lifetimes, if not mine. I think what we're seeing with also to sort of bring in climate emergency is our biggest healthcare challenge. So one of the things that I would hope AI could help with, if it's going to be contributing to that, is helping us understand how patterns of disease or ill health driven by places not really being habitable in the way they have been in the past would be something I would hope we could start to get a better handle on.
Yes. Oh, and I'm mindful of saying some shout out to some of our wonderful clients who we've had the privilege of working with in the smart data field, looking to join up those data sets to answer some of those questions. And maybe the final question, which is related again to that data point, but so, the AlphaFold, the protein folding discovery from DeepMind, obviously required the data to be, that wasn't synthetic data, that was real captured data before. So it looks like there are, one of the trends, at least in wellness, are wearables and devices for capturing more and more data, presumably for more and more use. Do you have a thought as how citizens, consumers, patients should think about, there's lots of different ways, you can think about this. One is, oh my goodness, who am I giving my data to? What's this for? Another is actually, I'm helping contribute to the sum of human advancement through additional data from new places. How at least do you feel about that, if not necessarily to tell others how to feel? Just
personally speaking, I spent not that much time in comparison to a lot of my clients, but quite a lot of time in the library learning about physics and learning to think about stuff the way a physicist would, which is what I was told in my freshers week, all I would learn in 4 years. It turns out it was all I learned, and it was really hard. And in that, I'm like, just because you can measure it doesn't necessarily mean it's helpful. And which is a rubric that both is like, puts me in the like, okay, well, all right, 1990s, wants its data view back, but also, if you've got stuff that comes out, I think still has some utility these days. So I think from a wearables point of view, there's lots of different things going on. Some of which, it's mainstream care. And if your doctor's suggesting you might want to wear something because it's going to provide a different insight, like I would do that if I was asked to. Some of the other sort of tracking variables, just cause, I don't. I try not to carry my smartphone around if I don't have to. I don't have a smartwatch. When I go cycling, there's no computer on the bike. And I just, I do think there's as much research about from living as embodied humans from a mental health point of view about being present.
So one of the things that we've been reflecting on throughout this conversation is about how we practice innovation at the PSC. And we're immediately thinking there's probably inevitably just even different domains in which you're doing it. There's innovation within a problem space, and then there's helping a client become more innovative or do more innovative things. So maybe you start, Jonathan. How would you even first react to the question of like, how do we do innovation?
So the first thing is like, just really try and understand the client's situation specifically. I talked earlier in this podcast about this privilege of serving different clients and how we could sort of draw the dots between situations. But actually, from an innovation point of view, I've only ever seen things work where we really show up and try and understand like what's special about a particular client, what's unique about their culture, what's different about the assets and platforms they have from others. Because while, we've talked in generalities about health and care here, when you really come down to it, even in a big teaching hospital, university partnership, there aren't actually that many sort of really big hitting sort of collaborations of activity. So really understand that, really be curious, really listen, really talk to as many people as they'll put you in touch with, really do your research on what the performance looks like, what the papers are like, and what the financials sort of stuck up to be. Because if innovation is as much about finding stuff that already exists and applying it effectively, then that has got to be a big part of where it lives. So that's sort of reflection one. Reflection two is then is the use case bit, or the the epic, if we still talk about that in agile technology, but understanding what it is that the people who are in charge of this stuff on behalf of the population and the government, however that's played out, really actually wants to change, so you can know what is and know where you're trying to go. And then in between, I think it's really important to just know that some iteration is going to be needed. One of the things we end up doing quite a lot is we have very clear processes with clients, but those processes are usually trying to bound the fact that sometimes you just need to play with a problem for just about long enough. So I think it might be a Big Bang Theory reference via Gideon, our old colleague who's now in Australia. So shout out to Gideon. Which is some problems you have to fence with rather than wrestling. And I think quite a lot of innovation stuff is in that. It's you just have to talk about it a bit and then disappear for a bit, do something else and come back to it. And having a process that bounds that so you can allow the right thing to rise to the surface. That's what makes consulting engagement work. Against a absolutely structured and rigorous set of deliverables and outlines in line with our proposal.
Of course. Well, that latter point really, not the proposal, the approach really resonates, reminds me of, we'll often say, particularly if you're thinking of a new product or service to develop in the digital world, we'll often we'll say, it's the double diamond thinking approach will really help you. So you have divergent thinking where all ideas are welcome, and then you eventually move down into convergent thinking and choose a few. And the reason why I say this is because so often I've set up in front of a client a slide which says, this is the process and this is the divergent bit, and this is where you're going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay, it's part of the process. And the relief that we'll often see when that happens is palpable.
Yeah, that's good. I'll use that more often, thank you.
Cool. All right, well, thank you, Jonathan, so much for joining the Next 20 series and reflecting on innovations, clinical and otherwise, and for sharing your wisdom over the last 16 years, and looking forward to the next 20 years of wisdom from you too. Thank you to all our listeners. Of course, you can reach out to us and Jonathan at thepsc.co.uk for anything if you want to talk about any of the work that we've been doing or our clinical innovation or life sciences work. And please tune in for another episode in the Next 20 series imminently.